Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Because every woman longs to be seen, to be romanced, to unveil beauty, and to play an irreplaceable role in the larger story, the feminine heart is set up for an assault. It was Stacey Eldridge who wrote, "Your heart matters more than anything else in all of creation. The desires you had as a little girl and the longings you still feel as a woman are telling you of the life God created you to live." The first CD is a recording from a live conference session where Linda Willett shares with a live audience the wounds and the assault of the feminine heart. Our lives and gifts as women are opposed, and the enemy's strategy comes against the feminine heart to discourage and deaden our hearts, making us live from small places rather than free and full in the role God has for us to play. In the second CD, I'm joined by some of my dearest friends to have a deeper conversation about the conference session and offer how the themes and truths in the session look in our own lives. I hope and pray God comes for your heart through these audio resources and invites you into more.
Good morning. It's so good to see you all here. I just wonder, can you just imagine for a minute what it would be like to live out of a full heart? A heart that was completely free, just free, alive, free to be all that you were created to be. One of the clips that Robin showed yesterday was Shakespeare in Love. Elizabeth Paltrow says something about to know a love that overthrows life. Can you imagine? Rather than living out of the small places of how we ought to be, wondering, do I matter? Am I enough? Am I too much? I have told a story so many times, and if you were here, you've heard it, but it was one of those profound moments in my life. John and I had taken a group of people to Israel, and because we flew on Swiss Air, we had a layover in Zurich on our way home, and John and I decided to stay for about 4 days before we headed all the way home. And so we rented a car at the airport, and we just took off, and we drove into the countryside. And our very first stop was an old bakery. And we went in and sat all the way in the back. We were sitting beside the back wall in a booth, and we talked. And after a while, John left for a minute, and I happened to glance at the wall beside me, and I didn't realize that it was an old mirror. And when I looked at myself in that mirror, I looked awful. Awful. And that image just stayed with me the next couple of days. You know that? Ugh. Well, the last night we were there, we stayed in a hotel since it was right near the airport, and the best thing about the hotel was the bathroom. It was lovely, lovely light, and that night I got a shower and stepped out of the shower, and I looked into the mirror, and I looked awesome. And a few minutes later, I walked out of the bathroom, and it hit me. Neither mirror was accurate. In order to get a really true picture of me, I would need to look into a perfect mirror. And it hit me, Linda, that is what you do all the time. I look into the reflection of people's faces to find out what's true about me. Oh, that visual, I will never forget. It was the story of my life. Do you know what I mean? I mean, some people, when you're talking with them and you're thinking, oh, I know I've disappointed them. I know I'm not enough. Or I know I'm too much. Others, you'll be talking, yeah, they like that. They like that. They like me. But neither is a true reflection of me. The only place we can go to get a true reflection of a true picture of what is really true about you and about me is to look into God's eyes. And there alone will we see what is true. And I can remember that night praying, oh, God, let me see myself in your eyes. Don't you just long for that? Is there a place down deep in your soul that is just crying out, God, I want to be free. I want to be free to be all you created me to be. I mean, when you stop and think of what God intended. Last night, I think Robin mentioned this verse in Ephesians chapter 1. It says, do we have that? Yes. How blessed is God, and what a blessing he is. Long before he laid down earth's foundations, he had us in mind. He had settled on us as the focus of his love, to be made whole and holy by his love. I ask the God of glory to make your eyes focused and clear so that you can see exactly what he is calling you to do and grasp the immensity of this glorious way of life that he has for you. It is what is the truest thing about you and about me. And I can just remember praying, oh, God, don't stop. I don't want to get to the end of my life and realize that I've experienced this much when God has this much for me. Have you been there? But I want to tell you something, and I think you'll probably agree. What that mirror reflects back to me speaks so loudly. The mirror of people's faces. And it feels so true. In fact, the message that we see in that mirror feels like the truest thing about me. Why is that? Because what we see in that mirror validates what we have believed about ourselves all of our lives. It validates the messages that we've grown up with. It validates the very story of our lives. Let me just tell you a little bit about my story. My mom had been told as a teenager that she would not be able to have children. She didn't have all the parts. And after my mom and dad were married several years, she became pregnant with me. So as you can imagine, I was a miracle. And I was the perfect child. I mean, we just had one happy little family, and it just sort of came easy to me to be easy. When I was 7 years old, my mom and dad decided to adopt a child. And now this was a very long time ago. And we went to the orphanage, and lots of children of different ages, babies, a little older, many in playpens. And we picked out a little 3-year-old girl, and her name was Karen, and Karen became my sister. But unbeknownst to us, Karen had lived through 3 horrendous years. She couldn't even talk at age 3. And what it looked like in our family was, to my mom and dad, I was the good girl, and Karen was the bad girl. And this played out over our growing up years. I saw something in my mom as I was growing up. If you disappointed her at all, you were completely out of her life. I saw her do that to one friend after another. I saw her do that to my dad, and I saw her do that to my sister. Well, how do you please someone 100%? Well, you learn how to be all they want you to be. And you know what? That came easy to me. So I learned to be whoever you want me to be. But the sad part was, the whole time, I was losing me. I went to college, and I remember being in a psych course, and I wrote a paper, and it was called, "Who Am I Really?" Because I didn't know who I was. I can remember in the dorm, walking into one dorm, and they'd say, "Oh, what a beautiful day." And I'd say, "Yes, it's a beautiful day." And then I'd walk into the next room, and they'd say, "Oh, what an awful day." And I'd say, "Oh, yes, it's an awful day." And you know what? I didn't know what I felt. I was just whoever you wanted me to be. I had such a highly edited version of my life. How do you want me to be? I'll be it. If that's not enough, I'll be more. If that's too much, I'll tone down. Just tell me. And you know what? It worked. It worked for me. After college, or in college, I met my husband, and we married, and the week before our first precious baby was born, John and I became Christians. And, oh, God just worked unbelievably in our lives. Woo! What did you say? And now we're all right. I guess it's all right. So here we were. We had become Christians, and two little girls, two precious little girls. If you were here last night, you saw their picture. But we went to seminary, and John became a pastor. And it was like, truly, it felt like my life was a fairy tale. Everything just worked, and it worked well. Until one day, I hit a wall. Now, I'll tell you a little more of the story a little bit later. But every one of us has a story, and because we live in a fallen world, we have a story of how that fallenness has touched our lives. It's just a given. We all had questions when we were little girls, like little girls do. Do you see me? Do you like what you see? Like Robin mentioned last night when one of her daughters came out. Do I look pretty? Am I enough? Am I lovely? And every one of us has a story as to how those questions were answered, sometimes in very painful ways. My friend Susan was here last year. She was basically raised by a nanny. Her mom and dad were very social, and they traveled a lot, so they were gone a good bit of the time. She was the youngest of 5, and her mom had pretty much told her that she wished she had never been born. And by the way, she laughed when she told me that. When she was abused by a neighbor, she couldn't tell her mom. Her mom wasn't home. And the shame that she saw when she looked in a mirror was unbearable. And that shame followed her throughout her adult life, and it just became the truest thing about her. She was always laughing. And I realized she was laughing so that she wouldn't cry. That was her way of surviving. But to listen to any woman's story, you discover the tears of a wounded little girl. I know we all have stories. Your story may have been devastating. Or perhaps you had parents who loved you dearly. But because we are all broken, we all have been loved with a less than perfect love. They may have adored you, but still answered your questions in a less than perfect way. Whatever our story, along with those wounds came messages. There's nothing about you that is lovely, that is worth pursuing. I wish you had never been born. I wish you were a boy. You are not enough. You are too much. And the sad thing is, we believed those messages. And those messages became the very truest thing about us. And we made agreements with the enemy behind the messages. I think probably we all love the movie Ever After, the modern day Cinderella story. Such an amazing picture of all of this. You know the story of Danielle. Her mother dies when she was born, and her father remarries. And when she's 8 years old, her father dies. Her father dies, and she is devastated. And she is just sobbing as he tells her that he loves her. But in these clips, we see those messages from the stepmother given to lovely, beautiful Danielle. I know there are women in this room who have had a taste of what Danielle is experiencing. Belittling, diminishing, discouraging words and messages. What does that do to her heart? Maybe even more important for us, what does that do to your heart? She just has such a precious, sweet, tender heart, but they don't see her glory. And then they really hit her hard. Those words, that's what we do. I am what she says. I am what she says. Have you said that? Have you said that about the lies, the wounds that you heard growing up? It's true. I am what she says. Because you see, what's even worse than the wound is what we do with the wound, how we handle that pain. That becomes even the greater tragedy, because then we have to come up with something that will make our life work, some strategy. We begin to hide, like I did. There's nothing in me worth seeing, so we let other people tell us who we are. How do you want me to be? I'll be it. If that's not enough, I'll be more. Brennan Manning writes, when I was 8, the imposter, or the false self, was born as a defense against pain. The imposter within whispered, Brennan, don't ever be your real self anymore, because nobody likes you as you are. Invent a new self that everybody will admire and nobody will know. Oh, they are devastating words. But that is what we do, isn't it? We come up with a strategy that will make our life work. We may become very controlling. My dear friend in Ohio, her dad was an alcoholic, and when she was in 7th grade, she was at a school dance. And her dad came to the dance drunk. And she was humiliated. And that day, she vowed that she would never allow herself to be humiliated again, which meant she had to be perfect. She had to be in control. Do you have any idea how that has affected her marriage, her children, her life to this day? Another dear friend, her dad also happened to be an alcoholic. And in fact, she stopped over at my house yesterday, and I asked her to tell me this story again. She longed for his attention. And she remembers the day that he told her that he would come home at noon to pick her up. So as a little girl, she sat on the stairs at noon and sat there all day long, and he never came. I will never forget when I asked her, "Oh, Jean, how was that?" And she said, it wasn't any big deal. My mom always said, when you're sad, make it glad. Get busy. Do you know that day she started to get busy? Where do you run when the ache of your heart makes itself known? There are so many ways that we try to numb. Food, shopping, or I was talking with a friend one day, Kathy, and she said something during the conversation that just touched on something that hurt inside of me. And I remember hanging up the phone, and I reached for the remote. And I stood there with it in my hand, and I thought, no, wait, I wasn't intending to turn on the television, but I realized that is my way to stay numb. Do you see what I mean when I say what's even worse than the wound is what we do with the wound, how we give into them, and we live out of them, and we make vows. I will never allow myself to be humiliated again. I will never allow myself to be vulnerable again. And that becomes the greater tragedy. And the whole time we're living out of the smallest places of our heart. And the enemy delights in keeping us there, keeping us hidden. He wants to keep us fighting to be in control. He offers all kinds of ways to keep us numb. John Eldridge said, there is a glory to your life, like we read in Ephesians, that the enemy fears, and he is hell-bent on destroying that glory before you act on it. And he is so persuasive, and it feels so true. In fact, what the enemy whispers, without a doubt, feels like the truest thing about us. What those whispers are telling us, what the shouts are telling us, what those mirrors are telling us. But do you see the sadness in all of this? In all of the control, in all of the hiding, in all of the things that we do to deaden the pain, to cover up the sadness. Do you see the loss in all of this? What's lost is you. What's lost is me. What's lost is who God created us to be, what God had in mind before the foundations of the earth. And the enemy is relentless in his mission to keep us, our story, our glory, from being carried out. And we may well have believed him. We may well to this day have been playing right into his hands. He is relentless. But there is a greater relentlessness. God is the relentless Redeemer, and greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. And he has come for us. He has come to ransom us. In Isaiah chapter 61, it says, he has come to heal the brokenhearted and set the captive free and open the prison to those who are bound. That means you. That means me. God is relentlessly committed to our healing, to restoring our hearts to what he created us for in the first place, that we might be free to live out of full hearts, to be you, to be me, Christ in you, the hope of glory. I want to go back to my story now. I believe we were living happily ever after. And then on April 30th, 1990, one day, on that day, I hit a wall. Like I said, John was a pastor in a fairly large church, and our church was going through a very difficult time. And believe me, not everyone was happy. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't keep everyone happy, which is what I desperately needed to do. You know what? I could keep my people happy, but my husband doesn't play that game. And he was the pastor, and he had a whole lot more people than I did. And I was so frustrated with him because he wasn't holding up his end of the bargain. And one day, I crashed. I hit a wall. Several months later, I was at a conference, and the speaker shared Psalm 139, "Search me, O God." The person who was speaking encouraged us to take time alone with God as many days as we possibly could get, just to pray, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me, know my anxious thoughts. See if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." All I can say is, on that day, God did begin to take me on a journey. I was whistling through my life, living out of the smallest places of my heart. But God loved me enough to allow me to hit a wall where I was not getting what I was desperately needing. Where do you keep bumping into a wall? Perhaps it's in a relationship. Perhaps it's in circumstances in your life where you're frustrated. And you may be frustrated with God because he isn't answering. He isn't taking it away. He isn't doing anything about it. And we cry out, "Where is God? And why isn't he doing something?" Oh, God is doing something. In Jeremiah, God says, "I will never stop doing good to them." Do you know there is never a moment in our lives that God is not doing us good? Never a moment. God is moving heaven and earth to restore the glory of our hearts. I love the book of Habakkuk, the little tiny book in the Old Testament. And I love in the first chapter, Habakkuk is looking, and basically he's watching horrible things happen to good people, and good things happen to horrible people. And you can just hear Habakkuk cry out, "God, why don't you do something?" And there's a little verse tucked into chapter 2 where God basically says, Habakkuk, I am doing something. You wouldn't believe it if I told you. And that is what is true. In John chapter 13, Jesus says to his disciples, what I am doing now you do not understand, but afterwards you will. I don't know what you've encountered in your life right now. Maybe it's a difficult person who is making your life miserable. Maybe it's something in your past that is so deeply painful and deeply wounding. There is an enemy who is out there who is wanting to keep you stuck right there. But just watch. The very thing that the enemy is wanting to use to derail you, watch and see the relentless Redeemer. Out of God's profound love for you, He has allowed you to hit that wall. He does that to wear us out. So we'll turn back to Him in thirsty longing. In Hosea, Robin, you might have read this last night, I'm not sure. Therefore, I will block her path with thorn bushes. I will wall her in so that she cannot find her way. She will chase after other lovers, but not catch them. Do you see yourself in those verses at all? She will look for them and not find them. This is no accident. This is the relentless Redeemer relentlessly pursuing you because He loves you so much. Larry Crabb has said, and I love this quote, the experience of despair is the initial movement in the rhythm of hope. This is the place God is up to something. Michael mentioned that I had last year told about a friend that I had brought 3 or 4 years ago. She was the angriest person I have ever known. She walked around with a scowl on her face. Her name was Susan also. And she came to the retreat. She sat here Friday night scowling all day Saturday, scowling Saturday night. And Sunday morning, I ran into Susan in the hall, and her face was radiant. And I said, Susan, what happened to you? Late Saturday night, unbeknownst to anyone here, Susan had taken her Bible and her little flashlight and walked up a hill somewhere where she screamed out to God. And that night, God met Susan in an unbelievably profound way. And the next morning, her face was soft. God reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness. And the light dwells with Him, it says in Daniel. Please don't rush past this place. Please. Would you be willing, like Susan, to make a courageous choice? This is just, these next minutes, it's just the most important time. And let me tell you, you will be so tempted with a distraction. Oh, I'll just do that later. But I would just encourage you to find some place to just get alone with God. With your journal, your pen, but mostly just with your hearts and your hands just open to God. And would you ask Him to come for you? Let me tell you, your head will say, don't go there. your heart will say, but I must. I wonder if now we would just quietly, and there are some questions for you to consider during this time. Would you just ask God to walk you through your story? Would you just ask Him to show you where your heart has been hurt, where you've been wounded, where you have known shame? What words have been spoken over you? What lies have you believed? What strategies have you come up with to make your life work? What is it that is special about you that the enemy is trying to destroy? Could we just pray for a minute, please? And then you can finish writing and go and just find a quiet place with the Lord. Oh, Father God, thank you that you came to heal, to set the captives free. Oh, I pray that you would meet with each one of us right now, Lord. Thank you that you love each precious woman here so fully, so deeply. Thank you that you are the relentless Redeemer. And I pray, Lord, that you will meet with each one of us. Open our hearts. Show us whatever it is, Lord, that you want us to see. Thank you that you are the faithful healer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I hope you have enjoyed this Zoe sharing series. It is our prayer that God has met you in a significant and intimate way. For more Zoe sharing series and additional resources for your journey, check us out online at zoe.org. That's ZOWEH.org. Also look for us on Facebook. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Because every woman longs to be seen, to be romanced, to unveil beauty, and to play an irreplaceable role in the larger story, the feminine heart is set up for an assault. It was Stacey Eldridge who wrote, "Your heart matters more than anything else in all of creation. The desires you had as a little girl and the longings you still feel as a woman are telling you of the life God created you to live." The first CD is a recording from a live conference session where Linda Willett shares with a live audience the wounds and the assault of the feminine heart. Our lives and gifts as women are opposed, and the enemy's strategy comes against the feminine heart to discourage and deaden our hearts, making us live from small places rather than free and full in the role God has for us to play. In the second CD, I'm joined by some of my dearest friends to have a deeper conversation about the conference session and offer how the themes and truths in the session look in our own lives. I hope and pray God comes for your heart through these audio resources and invites you into more. Let's talk about this wound thing and being wounded as women. What do you think about that? Let's talk about that a little bit.
I think women in general are very aware of wounds that have happened to them, but I personally hadn't been kind of introduced to the concept of a wound as something that was a specific event that the enemy would prey on. I think that's where this conversation gets a lot more serious for me. Like in Linda's talk, she mentions that it's not only the wound that's tragic. The bigger tragedy is what we do with that wound and where, what agreements we make when we are wounded and how we live those out, and living in from the smallest places of our heart. So I think I'd always been aware that, I had certain wounds in my heart and in my history, but the difference is that we do have an enemy that likes to capitalize on those wounds, and that we also heal those wounds and actually, in fact, use them to our glory and to his glory.
He
in a lot of
redeems.
ways. Exactly.
Redeems
The
them.
relentless redeemer. I like how she says that.
What are some other synonyms for wounds? When you hear wound, what are we talking about?
I think of hurts or scars or betrayals. I guess they could come in any form. And I would, to add to what Hope was saying, it's been a freeing thing to acknowledge wounds and the power that they can hold over a person in the present, because I feel like growing up, my personality, my environment, we were tough and we just got on with it. And that's very debilitating spiritually. It's so freeing to say, hey, this thing happened and it was awful and it's really derailed me in ways I haven't explored enough. And I've found that by doing that, it seems that if I know what's causing the things in my life, then I can also begin to understand how to deal with those things. So it's been very freeing and shaping to name it, to name wounds and the power they can have over us.
Yes. I can relate to that. And wounds, a word that has resonated with me is assaults. An assault on my heart, and being able to identify some of those assaults has been helpful for me in legitimizing some of the things that happened to me. Similarly, growing up in a background, we have similar backgrounds, and it wasn't okay in my family not to be okay. Everything had to look peaceful and good and harmonious. And so it was peace at all costs. So I agree with you. It's been helpful for me to see ways that my heart was assaulted, my heart was missed. That's another thing that for me, one of my wounds was my heart being completely missed. My heart was missed by my dad, who didn't know how to handle his little girl's heart. He didn't know how to handle my emotions, didn't know how to validate my emotions.
Well, and I like that synonym, or what you said, the assault, because there's definitely an intentionality to our wounds many times, and that's important to call out too. I mean, where are many of these things coming from? Fight back with the help of the Spirit. I like, that's a good word, assault.
And even also, just to add to that, kind of the flip side of assault, some people would say, well, I don't really think I've been wounded. Like, I haven't really had any big things happen to me. But they're very subtle things that can happen. Like, even just like you saying your heart being missed. That's not maybe one incident that was some huge, tragic thing that hit you, but it was almost like an accumulation of things, maybe events that were missed or just things that weren't recognized that you needed some support on. So I feel like there's also there's the assault, which is like a very direct thing in some ways, and there's also a subtle kind of accumulation of small assaults that add up to a wound.
Yes.
And
Sometimes
to be able
you
to
don't
identify that's
Great point.
Sometimes then you don't even realize that there's this wound or scar until much later.
Yeah.
After that accumulation of
Harder
things
to
has been
identify.
assessed and evaluated.
Let's talk about this concept that Linda brought up about mirrors. I'm fascinated by it, and am also bothered by it because I know it's true. It resonates with me very deeply. And I think of Snow White and mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? How did that resonate with you both? What did you think when you heard that? What did that stir up in you?
I don't even know where to start, really. This is such a huge topic, and one that I can truly affirm. I mean, it's deep. I've always, and I still do, struggle with where I'm finding my appraisal. I think when I was little, somehow I learned that others could either make me feel really, really great about myself, or they could do just the opposite. And I learned to be and flex with whatever I thought their expectations were. And I am a perfectionist by nature. I mean, I'm a type A. I love to please. There's something healthy about that, and there's something sick about that. I love to make people happy and connect with people, but I learned how to read into everybody's ideas about me more than what God thinks about me. I mean, I don't even know that I ever thought about what God thinks about me when I was little. I somehow looked to my parents. I wanted so desperately to please them. And there was love there too, but I so desperately wanted to please them that they almost took the place of God for me. But I read my worth, my appraisal in the eyes of others, and I still fight this to this day.
When Linda was talking about the mirror, I literally at first was picturing a mirror, but then I realized that I too, the whole notion of comparison and what is the truest, reflection of me. I feel like I so often took that question of who am I, what's my worth to other people, and especially as a little girl. When I started going to public school, I was homeschooled until second grade, and we were very poor by society standards. And so when I started going to a public school, I went to a school where there were a lot of wealthy kids. And I would see how the other kids were dressed and what their parents dropped them off in, the kind of vehicles. And I can just remember feeling like just such a ragamuffin. And I wanted to be beautiful, and I wanted to be well-dressed, and I wanted to take expensive gymnastics lessons and, turn flips on the playground. But I couldn't because of our financial situation. So that was the first time when it really was apparent to me, and I could feel myself comparing myself to others and feeling like I don't measure up, I'm not enough. And just a kind of sad outcropping or example of that, I remember I went to Goodwill with my dad and found a pair of Guess jeans that weren't my size, and I found a pair of jeans that were my size, and I got my dad to buy both, and I cut off the Guess jeans thing and sewed the triangle onto the back of some jeans that were very obviously not Guess jeans and was called out on it by one of the girls in my class. I mean, the length that I went to try to measure up, I mean, that is insane. But that pressure to feel like I fit in, even just with the brand name of a pair of jeans, was just, I feel like, a case in point of that, how dangerous that comparison can be and how inaccurate that mirror really was. But that's all I had to go on at that point.
And can I jump in and say, having middle school and high school girls, I see, it's easy to say, yes, if we can just look into Jesus' eyes and know our worth and know our true worth and value. But it truly is a fight a fierce
It's a
battle.
war.
It is a war.
It's a knockdown,
brutal-
drag out.
It is a brutal assault on our hearts because I see it every day with our girls and just how vicious girls can be with each other and the standard to which they are held. And if they want to fit in and be included and be invited, which we all do. I don't care if I'm 15 like my daughter or
I
45.
struggle now. Yeah.
Exactly. It is so powerful because to not be invited, to not be included is to be alone, and our deep, deep, deep fears as women is to be alone, is to be abandoned, is to be unloved. So it is a fight. It really is.
Well, and you see it's everywhere. I mean, we really could talk about this for a very long time because the time spent in gyms and in malls and in beauty salons and there's surgery and just there's
And heads
every
in toilets
person
with bulimia and
just crying out
calorie
to
counting to the
Yeah.
last
it
lessons.
consumes every ounce of our time if we don't have Jesus jumping into our story. And even for us who do know our worth in Jesus, I feel like I need every day, multiple times, to look into his words and be reminded, this is who you are. You are who I say you are. And you need friends singing out that truth to you as well and helping you not get wrapped up in the beauty rat
Pool
race
of the world and the pool of the enemy too that whispers to us, you're not enough, or you're too much, or plays those tapes again for
or
us.
just turn on the television and watch any show or any commercial that comes on. It's usually you're not enough, but the whole too much is in there too. And buy this so that you'll be enough. I mean, it's just the world, and it's a constant, sometimes subtle, sometimes more apparent assault.
The wonderful thing, though, is that sort of implied by this conversation is that we have a choice. There's something we can do about it. I mean, we can orient ourselves toward the accurate mirror. We have this isn't a hopeless battle.
Right.
That is
We're not
very
stuck here.
That's very encouraging. Yeah. That's actually very encouraging news.
Rebecca, you're so right. But what I am coming to understand more and more is as long as we are believing lies, they have such a hold on us. They have such power. What you believe matters. It has authority in your life. And so often the lies feel so much more true. I believe Linda talked about that. They feel so much more, they're more prevalent, they're more powerful. And I can know the right things. I can know the scripture verses. I can have those memorized and know what's true, but what I've experienced feels more true for me. We call it our personal theology. There's a biblical theology, what I know is right and what I know is true, but my own personal theology is what has happened to me, what I have experienced, and that feels more true in the moment.
And I feel like that's the whole dichotomy of living in the spirit versus living in the flesh. I mean, in the flesh, that personal theology and what she thought about me and what he said and when I got called out on this and all those things feel true. And they are true in the flesh, but they aren't, they're accurate. They happened, but they're not true. Whereas if you can be in the spirit and stay in that knowledge of who you truly are in Christ, that is truth, and that's freedom, and that is life-giving.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps what shapes our personal theology most strongly is our wounds. We especially maybe
Absolutely.
when we're young Christians, that is going to shape our practical theology. So when we are assaulted by something, when we're wounded, then we begin living the truth that comes to us, or what seems true from that message, and informs a message from that wound. And then we therefore start making agreements because of the wound,
Yes.
whether or not it's actually true.
Yes.
And then we have to find ways to handle, the agreement we've made. How are we going to live from this?
Right.
Because of how we've been hurt, how we've been assaulted.
Right. Exactly. And like Linda said, along with the wounds come messages, very powerful messages. The messages of the wounds, and they can be, you're not enough. You're too much. You really don't have anything to offer.
You can't do it.
Yeah, you can't do it. You should just be quiet. And then from that place, the enemy is looking for us to agree with that. Those may be what he's whispering in our ear, or wherever the messages are coming from. He's looking for us to agree and say, yes, that's true.
And he
I
says,
am
amen.
not enough. I shouldn't talk. I shouldn't even try to do that. They're going to laugh, or they're not going to whatever. And so then we make vows. I will never, like Linda mentioned, I will never be humiliated again. I will never be shamed again. I will never be hurt again. So we construct.
Or I will always have an
Yes.
answer, or I will
Yes.
always be
perfect.
fit, or I will always have the brand name jeans so that I can combat this attack. Right. And then it can happen on a small scale, and I found that I've had these wounds and these messages come from seemingly insignificant little situations, and then I've had them on a huge scale, with my divorce. But nonetheless, they shape your practical theology and what you believe about yourself.
Right. I really like what Linda said when she said what is even worse than the wound is what we do with the wound. How we handle the pain. That is the tragedy. And so we come up with strategies to make our life work. So let's just take a minute and let me ask you, how have you tried to make life work? How have you tried to arrange for life, to protect yourself? Or what strategies have you personally come up with to help not feel the pain, to make it okay?
Well, I have a wound that happened really early on, and there were other sort of counterparts to that one, but the earliest one I can remember, where I started trying to arrange for life based on that, was I was probably 4 or 5, and we lived, I've probably mentioned to you all before, but we lived on a small farm way off the grid, and the way that we made our butter was by skimming cream off of the cow's milk that we milked every morning. And we would put the butter in these little ball jars, and we would shake it up to make butter. And my little hands dropped the jar, and so we lost all that cream, and that was our butter for like the next couple days. And my mom proceeded to scream at me, and there was a mess all over the floor, and I was shamed about, you made this big mess, and now we're not going to have butter, and spanked me, and just totally, developmentally, I probably shouldn't even have been the one shaking the butter, but just her response was so out of line with what had happened. And so I just, in that moment, I remember feeling, very ashamed that I couldn't handle this, even, this little task, and what a baby I was, and I couldn't do it right. And so I vowed that I just shouldn't try new things unless I was perfect at them already, which is an impossibility because you're not going to be perfect at something on your first try. So I can remember my dad he was teaching me how to read, and he would give me spelling words, and he would have me write out a word and then write it over and over again and learn it. And then he would want to give me more difficult words, or with math problems, a little bit more difficult ones. And I would always resist any kind of transition to something harder that I perceive as that was more difficult, because I didn't know how to do it yet. And so I had this fear that I would fail at it, and so I shouldn't attempt it. I should just perfect whatever I could do and whatever I already knew how to do.
What you could do well.
Exactly. And so that has really haunted me my whole life, and to this day it's something I still battle against, trying new things and not being fearful of new experiences. And it continued to play out when I was 12. My dad died, and he was the one who really had been an encourager. And when he died, I was no longer living with my mom. Then he passed, and so I lived with foster families. And I specifically remember being in the apartment a couple days after my dad died and realizing I was all on my own. And so what I had to do was be the best and perfect at everything so that I could make it. And so that meant, getting straight A's in school, keeping my room, completely spick and span, making sure my appearance was always perfect, being the best, being the leader of every group in school, all these things. But the way that I tried to do that was by striving to be perfect at everything, not taking big risks on things that seemed really difficult, but just trying to perfect everything that I did. And it was such a...
Sounds exhausting.
It was a prison of perfectionism. Yeah. It was exhausting. And that stayed with me.
So you're living fearfully as well.
For
You're
sure.
living in fear of failure and in fear of...
And that followed me into my 20s. And like I said, today I still battle it on different fronts, but I'm starting to be able to recognize it for what it is, and that it's not true, that I can try new things and I can succeed at things that I didn't think I could at first. But it just shows that power, that kind of stronghold that those agreements can have over our lives for decades.
Yes. How deeply they run, how powerful they are.
I have the same patterns of being wounded, kind of learning a message or hearing a message about yourself, and then figuring out how you're going to handle it. One of the many messages came from my divorce. Many were, regarding physical things. You're not skinny enough or smart enough, but you're too simplistic, you're too sheltered. These sorts of things. One of the messages I heard was that I should stop wasting time and money on my creativity because it didn't have any value. And so I came away, and the message I heard loud and clear from kind of the rejection of who I was creatively. I was always sewing something or drawing something or trying to make some money at home with the kids by being creative. And I don't know that my ex-husband didn't think they had any value. I think that he thought they did, but they didn't make enough money. They weren't as valuable as his because they weren't lucrative. And I just began to feel really beaten down about that. And then too, I grew up very sheltered, very protected. And so therefore I wasn't world savvy, and he felt that I should be a lot more world savvy. And so many times I would say things, and the look on his face or something would just make me feel really stupid. So the message I came away with, and it was so gradual. It was over the course of 10 years that I began to just feel dumb and like my creativity was silly. And so the message I heard was just be quiet. Be quiet artistically, be quiet verbally, be quiet just be quiet, because you don't have anything valuable to say or show or share. Don't try that. Don't go there. And so I did. And the crazy thing is I began to hide. That was one of the things I did. My strategy became solitude, control, and perfectionism. The solitude felt safe because nobody could ask anything of me that I didn't have to give, because I was utterly depleted. I had tried, kind of like Linda said in her talk, just tell me what you want me to be. I'll just be it. I had done that for 10 years. I just want to be what you want me to be. I want you to love me. I want this to work. I'll just be it. So I felt like I had nothing left to give. So I holed up in my house, and I literally remember, this is one of the outworkings of that solitude strategy. I remember literally hiding from my friends at church. I would see a friend heading toward me, and I was so afraid that she was going to ask me to come over to her house or something really radically unpredictable like that, that I would literally duck behind someone or try to get out the door before she found me. And this is one of my best friends. I still, to this day, have a fear when the phone rings. It's ridiculous. God is healing. But the phone rings, and I so often panic because I'm so afraid somebody's going to want something from me. And so I hid. I hold myself up. And now some of that solitude was good, because that's also where I began to see Jesus' face and see my reflection in his eyes, which changed everything. But I did. I hid, and then control. I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted to make sure that I was protected, and nothing could get to me like that had gotten to me. And so I wanted to just control the situations, and I wanted to be perfect, because clearly I wasn't good enough before. So I wanted to be validated because I was doing things so well. And these were and I mean, that was a soup. I mean, those three things took different shapes in all sorts of different situations. I mean, there was even a pew I like to sit in at church. And I would try to get there. I would have the boys go and save it, because it was in a specific spot that was less visible. It was toward the back. It was close to the doors, so people wouldn't see me, and it was only large enough for the three of us, so nobody could sit with me, which is so crazy, because I am a people person. I love people. So now looking back and realizing the extent of my woundedness and the way it was as if I said to myself, nobody's going to protect me. I've got to protect me.
Yes.
And these were the ways I did it. But solitude, control, and perfectionism.
And for those of us who know you,
I know, I'm just listening to this and thinking, this doesn't even sound like Rebecca.
No, but it's like Linda said, when we do these things, what's lost is you.
Right.
You were completely buried.
I don't know if I would have recognized you.
No, really.
I wouldn't have let you catch me, so you wouldn't have been hiding. I wouldn't have been hiding behind the pew.
But you lose you. And I think another way to say that is you lose the glory that God uniquely placed in you. And so often the wounds come directly at our glory.
Yep.
And that is so powerful to recognize, to see that so often the enemy just sees to it that we are kept for as long, 10 years, for however long he could keep you hidden and keep you down and keep you believing those lies, because you were nothing like your shimmering self that we know.
You weren't
now.
a threat to him.
Nothing, right.
Well, and it's just, what's so crazy to me is how residual they can be. I mean, that I can still, David and I we laugh now because the phone will ring and I'll answer it, and we'll just both kind of wink at each other like, aren't you proud of me? I did it. I answered the phone, just because for so long I equated the phone ringing with a demand or a question or a test or and I just hid myself off. And I'll probably get to this more later, but I do think that my assaults, the wounds and the messages that came to me were targeted dead center on the ways that God would like to use me. I believe that with all my heart. And like I said, I'll probably talk about that more later. But
So, what really we have been talking about is how these wounds and vows and agreements have created what Linda refers to as small places. So, we're living from these small places, these smaller stories, but they don't contain us. But we try to manage our life, we try to control and make it happen. And it's interesting. I thought it was interesting, Hope, when you're saying you're striving, trying to make it happen, wanting to be the best. And then on the flip side, Rebecca, you're hiding and not wanting to answer the phone. And they're just great examples of what we do. Either we hide or we attempt to control. And I love how Linda brings up the passage in Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. And it's asking him, show me ways that I have created for myself, things that I don't even recognize, things that I don't even see, any of the hurtful ways that I see myself, any of the lies that I'm believing. I love the offer of, where he goes on to say, see if there's any hurtful way in me and lead me in the everlasting way. And God is so good. I love how Linda's talking about turning from these wounded places, these ways that we've sought to protect ourselves, but we're not stuck there. She reminds us, and God reminds us what is true. He never stops doing good to us. And in Habakkuk, where he says, you wouldn't believe it if I told you what I was doing. He is always up to good. And I love thinking of him as the relentless Redeemer. He makes good from the hard, from the wounds, from beauty from ashes.
And I like to think about this as juxtaposing self-help with the relentless Redeemer. Because I feel like there's such a trap in self-help to say, well, I have these problems. I'm a perfectionist. I'm a control freak. I'm a nitpicker. I'm this, I'm that, because, I'm just fundamentally flawed. And so I just really need to work on this behavior and fix that about myself because, it's not working well. And self-help is always going to end in, just finding another problem you need to tackle. Because if we don't have that overarching principle, that that all-consuming love and that connection to that, knowing that he loves us in our brokenness, that he wants to heal those broken spaces, because some of them we can't even identify, like searching those deep places in our hearts that, are so deeply seated from, things that happened when we were very young, or just things that we've been protecting and shielding ourselves from that pain for so long, we don't even realize what we're doing. So if we don't have him as that loving force that can search us and heal those spaces, it's just going to be one self-help process after the next, and that is doomed to failure. So it's freeing to know that he helps us to heal from these things. We don't have to do it ourselves. We can't do it in our own power.
Well, and along those lines, Linda talks about Psalm 139 and searching to see what in me is hurtful. But, the beginning of Psalm 139 gives us so much hope, too, because that's when he shares how fully he knows us and how closely he walks with us. So kind of what, to your point, this isn't a self-help class. This is realizing that he fully knows us. He will help us identify these things. He will draw us out. He's the mirror that reflects what we really need to see and what's really true.
So how has God redeemed these wounds for you both? How has he shown you maybe what's in the way? where you've been living from these smaller stories. How has he rescued you from your false
Small
self,
places.
small places? Where is he restoring, redeeming, healing?
I like that small places way of looking at it. And I also like to think about it in terms of color because I love art and color. And I just think what the devil tries to do is dull everything and gray everything and just take away the brilliance and the resplendence that God dreams of for us. And in my situation, I feel like the message I was hearing was keep quiet, don't attempt to share anything because you have nothing to share. And what God did for me was he gradually began taking the film off of the dulled view of myself and who he is through his brilliant, his customized love for me. It was little acts of little and big acts of his delighting love toward me, things he did for me that only he would know would delight my heart.
What's an example?
Oh, don't get me started.
Even if it's a little one.
Oh, I don't know. I'm hoping I haven't shared these already, but I love Starbucks. I used to love to go to Starbucks and just read and sip a coffee. Maybe it was because there were no children there or something. I don't know. But people would walk by me at church and hand me a Starbucks card, or I'd get Starbucks cards in my mail, or, you can get them on Facebook. People just started giving me Starbucks cards out of the blue, and I didn't ask for those, or, whether it was money in the mail or somebody taking me shopping for clothes, just things I began to see more and more that he was a delighting, adoring father who loved to touch my little heart. And it was through that he began to remind me of who I am to him. And one of the first things he did, along with the gifts, was he began to affirm in me who I really am, which, crazily enough, flew in the face of my messages. For example, he started to affirm in me my quirky artistic spirit that used to get on my ex-husband's nerves. Like, I had friends and not even friends, people who I would respect or professionals affirming things in me and making me think, you know what? Maybe that's inspiring to people. Maybe I have something to offer after all. He began showing me that I am an artist. I mean, in a way I used to like to doodle. I used to be like to be creative, but I had no idea what I was capable of, with his hands guiding mine. And so he began to show me his customized love and rename me. And ironically, like I said, it was in the exact places of my wounds. Be quiet and don't share because you have nothing valuable to share. It was the exact opposite. It was, Rebecca, you inspire people. You're quirky and weird, and that's wonderful because normal is boring, and you have something. Get out there and share it, And so the more I realized that he had made me this Rebecca on purpose, it brought vision back, it brought life back, and healing and hope and
color.
Yeah, and lots of color. right.
Technicolor.
That's
Right.
awesome. That's good. A perfect example of how your wounds came right at the place of your glory.
They really did. It's uncannily so. They were exactly where I was wounded. I really thought my creativity is silly. It's really silly. But it is what brings me so much happiness, and it's
others.
the way I love to,
Happiness.
if I want to show somebody I love them, something always happens. I always find myself in the kitchen with my apron on or drawing something. So it's just this
Creating,
innate thing that God did on purpose in me, and He's restoring that, and it's bringing me joy, it's bringing others blessing, and it's bringing Him praise. It's John 15. He creates us for this fluid intimacy, which the devil almost wiped me completely out.
Yeah.
Through the messages from my wounds.
Right. Wow.
I can so relate to almost getting wiped out by the enemy. I talked a little bit earlier about becoming a perfectionist and very ambitious and controlling. So it worked, like Linda mentions in her talk, that it worked for a long time for her to be a people pleaser and get her validation from others. Right. So for me, it worked to be ambitious, to almost capitalize on the fact that I had been so wounded so early on that I almost wore this badge of like, I'm a victim. And really, I was in a lot of ways, but I started to live out of that hurt place, and I was able to, get grades and win tons of scholarships and go to college when I probably wouldn't have otherwise. And so my ambition and all this control served me well for a while until I hit rock bottom. I was striving and working my way up the career ladder. I got a master's degree. I had this great resume, doing a lot of social justice organizing work, and I was getting a good income, but I wasn't fulfilled, and I was getting more and more depressed. I was getting more and more exhausted with having to uphold this level of productivity and just giving myself constantly to people and to causes, but not really being whole in my heart. And so I had a really difficult but then awesome experience. I was driving to work in Raleigh to this job that for all practical purposes was a good job. I mean, it had great vacation, good pay. I was working for a good cause with good people, but I was not happy. I didn't want to be there. I was driving into the bright sunlight on I-40, pedal to the metal in the left lane, probably going 85 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour, racing to work to this job I didn't want, to keep doing something I didn't want to do and wasn't built for. And this little Datsun drives in front of me in the left lane going like 60 miles an hour. And at first I'm like, what are you? And at this point, I was so depressed. I was suicidal. Like I had ideas of turning my car into oncoming traffic. To just, I didn't want to hurt anyone else, but I was out of my gourd in darkness and depression. And this little Datsun pulls in front of me going 60 miles an hour. And I'm like, get out of my way. I need to get to this job I hate. and I'm praying. I'm like, Lord, if you made me for a purpose, I need to know what it is, because I am not feeling it. I'm done. And I'm like praying for a sign, for a purpose, and getting angry at this Datsun. And I look at the license plate on it and it says Song Tree. And I'm like, Song Tree? What? That's weird. And then I got the question, well, what does a song and a tree need? A bird, a songbird. And you are my songbird. And it was like all these years of like striving to be something that I thought I was supposed to be, improving myself, that I could do it, I could be the best, I could be perfect, I could make my own way in this world. It was like I was able to breathe, and it just lifted off of me. Wow. Because through all of that, what I always have really wanted to do is sing. Like, that's the truest part of my heart. That's what I love to do. And he basically just told me, like, you want to take your life, and I've given you this gift that you love to do, and I love to hear you.
And that blesses others.
To be a songbird.
That fluid threesome again. Yeah. Wow.
So that was amazing. And he renamed me, and now, I mean, I still can see when I'm starting to, inch my way into perfectionism and do things just so. And now I have a husband who also knows Christ and is walking in this kind of message. And so he can ask me, like, are you being Mary or are you being Martha? Like, because he knows that I'm supposed to be Mary and delighting in the Lord and singing songs, and not Martha, who's like angry and in the kitchen and trying to make everything just right. And so I guess just another way that I've been blessed is he's put me with a mate, with a spouse who loves my heart and loves Christ and can help me recognize when I'm living out of those small places and try to pull me out of that. Try new things, Hope. You can do it. Like, he encourages, why don't you, write a song about that? Like, just what you said was beautiful. Why don't you write that? And so there's just manifold ways that he's come for my heart, but that's just one big
That's
case in
awesome.
point
Yeah.
where the enemy literally
Yeah.
about took me out.
Yeah,
With my
and
own
you can
driving.
sing. You are a bird. You are a bird. I just thought of something funny too. There are these really large ways that God comes. On the deepest, in the deepest places of your heart, and heals and redeems. And but there are also ways, practical ways He comes. Step by step, one day at a time, and meets us and helps us to heal and grow and stretches us. And one example of this is I keep saying how I went and I hid. And so the story is, I was a single mom, but I had my 2 boys half the time. So that meant I had half of every week in my quiet little house all by myself with all my time at my disposal. Well, about, I don't know, a year or two, I guess about 2 years ago now, a girl in my church was needing a place to stay. And for whatever reason, I said, come live with me. Just live with me, which became this amazing transition for me that started growing my little hermit heart and taking me to the place where I am now, where I have 5 children and a husband. And so there are 7 people in my family, along with a good deal of chickens.
Lots
and
of animals.
Animals.
Lots.
And I'm constantly needed. And for really important things. But God, I love how He took me gradually from that place. And then the other thing is, kind of like Hope was saying, I also have a husband who is so gracious. Like, he knows where I'm coming from. He knows where I'm headed. He knows the true self. And He's so patient with me. So God did that. I mean, none of that happens accidentally. God knew what my heart needed to heal. And so He brought Kristen, my roommate, to start, expanding my horizons a little bit, stretching me a little bit. And now I have all these squirrely girlies and boys, and it's wonderful. It's so wonderful. But I just think, as we look at our wounds and the messages, and we can maybe get discouraged, how can I ever get from here to there? Even if I believe that this is true, it could sound like a bunch of views through rose-colored glasses, but I have experienced how God, in the practical ways also, just takes you one step at a time and
Walking
makes
with
it
Him.
possible. This is not self-help. This is Jesus in us,
Meeting us.
giving us the desire and the power to do what makes His heart happy.
I loved that. Was it Habakkuk that Linda talked about, with where, the Lord can hem us in, and if you mistake that process.
Hosea.
Hosea. Okay. If you look at that as, He's holding me back from what I want to do, or why isn't this working? Why isn't the Lord coming through? I mean, you can make some agreements that are wrong, but I experienced that just in that example I talked about, where I felt like things getting tighter, and it was almost like the squeeze was on me, and I felt that something had to give, and the enemy wanted me to believe that the way that you're going to get out of this is just take your own life, because it's done, and there's nothing else that's good, and this is just exhausting. So, but there was that tiny hope in me that was like, maybe this could be, just Him trying to show me this isn't right, and it hasn't been right. You're hitting your head up against the same wall, because that's not the right way to go. And so that passage that Linda mentioned just resonated with me, that, sometimes He does hem us in, but it's ultimately He had to bring us to that place for us to turn our eyes back to Him, to say, okay, where do we go from here, Dad? Because I'm done hitting my head against the wall.
Right. And I love the customized love. He has shown each one of us that in the middle of our pain, in the middle of our story, that He sees you. That's what I heard both of you saying. He saw you in the hurt and in the heartache, and then custom came for you, intimately met you where you were, and started that redemptive process, restoring your true heart, which is so beautiful. Thank you, Rebecca and Hope, for sharing your stories, both the wounds, vows, and agreements that invaded your story and the stories of healing. I love how God, the relentless Redeemer, has and continues to come to heal, redeem, and restore your beautiful hearts. Thank you. I hope you have enjoyed this Zoe sharing series. It is our prayer that God has met you in a significant and intimate way. For more Zoe sharing series and additional resources for your journey, check us out online at zoe.org. That's ZOWEH.org. Also look for us on Facebook.